Street Chamber of Commerce studio. My name is Mary McKinley. I am the Public Outreach Coordinator for the Greene County Record Center and Archives, and I am here today with Dave. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Dave Rubin. Hello.
We're going to start with just a little bit of kind of basic information. So can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
Sure. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, first 16 years of my life.
Okay. So you went to high school the first couple of years in New York?
I went through high school in New York.
Okay. So how did you come to Xenia?
How did I come to Xenia? You want the whole story?
Yes. As much as you're willing to share.
So I went to school upstate New York. I went to Cornell, New York State College of Agriculture at Cornell. Got my bachelor's degree. Somebody who got their PhD from Cornell was taught some of the classes, especially the labs that I took. And he finished up the year, he got his PhD the year before I got my bachelor's degree. And he ended up at Indiana State University in Terre Haute. And so the year after, when I graduated, I ended up following him there and working as his graduate student. And that's where I met Becky. And so I did my graduate work at Indiana State. I got a master's and a PhD. We got married in 1968. I finished up in August of 1969. I got a position in Florida where we lived for 1 year, and then I got a teaching job at Central State, and that's when we came to Xenia.
So what were your experiences like in Xenia before the tornado?
Sort of tying in a little bit with what Becky said, one of the things that I really remember about Xenia was the small town feel, the quaintness of it, real friendliness, I think, of everybody. For the downtown area, I distinctly remember the cobbled streets around the courthouse area still had the trolley tracks in it. The hotel, the Xenia Hotel, which was in the downtown area on Detroit Street. Lots of little stores, lots of places to shop. You really didn't have to go someplace else to find places to eat, places to buy clothes, to buy other kinds of things. There was I forget what it was called, but I don't know if it was every Friday or maybe it was one Friday a month, there was sort of a downtown evening day, I think, where the shops put out stuff on the streets for sale, and there were all kinds of people. I mean, it was just lots of people downtown. It was a very vibrant place.
So how old were you when the tornado occurred? You were married at that point?
So I was 31 at the time of the tornado.
And teaching at Central State?
And teaching, yeah, I started at Central State in September of 1970.
So can you walk me through the day of the tornado, starting in the morning? What did you do that day?
Not really, because I don't remember the early part of the day. I'm presuming I was at Central State for a good part of it, but I really don't remember. What I do remember is that afternoon, one of the classes I was teaching that quarter, Central State was still in the quarter system, was an upper level ecology class. It was a class for junior and senior biology majors. And the class students had a number of questions, and so she kept me after class, and we were talking. This was in Banneker Hall, which is the science building. It survived the tornado. It took a lot of damage. It's no longer there now. But we were in one of the rooms on the ground floor. The ground floor is sort of was a sort of a half basement, half first floor, and I'm presuming, trying to remember when the tornado hit, that this probably would have been at about 4:35 or so, because, well, or maybe a little bit past then. Another student, not in that class, came inside, and he happened to be, I don't know if he was a sophomore at that point. He wasn't a biology major. He had been in an introductory biology class the previous quarter, and he was on the track cross country team. And he came into the building, and Pete just saw us there and said, "Hey, you got to come outside and take a look at this." So we, me and the student and this runner went outside, and we could see the tornado. It was right over Xenia at the time, and so we stood out there probably for about, I couldn't, this may not be accurate, but probably 30 seconds to a minute, something like that, looking at this thing, and it was huge. And we knew it was over Xenia, and we could tell it was moving towards us. So we went back inside the building. The building consisted of an old original part and then a new part, which was actually a little bit larger, that had been added at a later time. And on that ground floor, the best place to be protected from something was sort of where the two met, because there was a decent sized area where there were, it was exposed on the hallway on either side, but there were no windows or anything. It was solid on the sidewalls. So we ended up down in that area where the two buildings, where the two parts of the building met, and we got down on the floor, and so there were the three of us, but there ended up being, and I forget how all this happened, but there were probably 7 or 8 of us that ended up in that same spot lying on the floor. One was Herman Brown, who was our stockroom man. One, I think, and I may not be remembering this, exactly correctly. I think the math secretary at the time was there. I know the biology department secretary was there, and I don't quite remember who else. But we lay on the floor, and then we could sort of, at a minute or two later, we could hear this noise starting to rev up, and we just, got as low as we could. I remember sort of wrapping my hands around over the top of my head as, we were lying down, and you could tell the noise, and it sounded just like a freight train. And it sounded like it was going right over us. It seemed like that lasted for, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 seconds or something like that. And then all of a sudden it got very, very calm, and I thought, okay, we got through it. And then all of a sudden it started up again, and it was exactly the same for about another 10 seconds or so, and then it finally passed. So I'm figuring that we just got in when the calm had been right in the very center of it, and we'd gotten the front end and then the back end as it went over. which had been clear when we got in, but now was completely littered. We basically had to do some climbing over things to get out to the door that led to the outside. I also noticed, so my office was on that ground floor in the old part of the building, on the north side of the building. And from where we were lying, as I was facing that way, to the left was the biology storeroom, and then the next room was my office. And one of the part of the building, one of the more recently built parts, was a one-story, a very large lecture room, and one of the steel joists from that had come through, so it had been pulled and wrapped around it, and came through the building, through the office, across the hall from my office, at about that level, and the wall to my office is over here, and it had gone up to about that far up there, so it had gone all the way across the hallway, and we were lying about 20 or 30 feet down from that, so by about 20 or 30 feet, we could have been impaled. So that was kind of scary.
I imagine so.
When we got outside, it was just, everything was destroyed from, what we could see. Everything was in really bad shape. The exit that we went out, which led to the front of the building, the lecture wing that had been there, and to one side there were no walls or a roof. That was gone. The floor was there, and student desks, the rows of the little metal things with wood on them were. And this is a big lecture hall. They were, mostly still there, so it was just all open. And I think I remember this correctly, but I've always remembered there being a small vehicle, and I think it was like a Volkswagen Bug that was sitting in the room there.
In the lecture hall?
Yeah. We looked around. We didn't go all over campus. I mean, we just looked there. I went in the back of the building. My car had been parked in back of the building. There was some parking areas. There was the university health center, infirmary, and there was a water tower structure right in back. The water tower. I went around to see where my car, how my car was. The water tower was broken and over. There was lots of damage to the health center. Couldn't see my car. So I had to look around a little bit. And that part of campus, Banneker was right in front of where the Woods Ravine is that goes down to Massey Creek. So sort of looked over there, and my car was down in the ravine quite a ways, and it was lying on its back. I brought one of the Xenia Tornado books. There's a picture in there, and that shows the health center and the tower and stuff, and you can actually see my car in the ravine down there. What it looks like is you could just see the little headlights sticking up there. The stockroom man, Mr. Brown, who lived in Springfield, offered to give me a ride into Xenia. His car was still there, but as I recall it, it didn't have any glass in it anymore. But it was there, and he got it started. And his wife also worked at Central State, and I think they were both in the car, and I was in with them, and he took me in towards Xenia, and we only got to the outskirts because then all the power lines were down, and you just couldn't drive in. So he let me off on the outskirts of Xenia on 42, and then I walked the rest of the way, and I'm guessing down to church and over. I don't know if I would have gone to Monroe and up, or gone. Well, yeah, I would have walked to Monroe and then up to Stadium, and then up Stadium up the hill. So obviously, just there was destruction all through that. And when I went to the bottom of the hill, starting the way up to Stadium, everything was, as my memory, everything was flattened, and I was really starting to get worried about what I was going to find or not find on the way up. And then I got up towards the top, and there were 3 houses pretty much that were in halfway decent shape. Everything else was, either gone or flattened or in really bad shape. And ours was the one right in the middle, and sorry. As I recall, the 3 of them were standing outside the front door.
We can go ahead and take a moment. Okay.
Thanks.
I don't know, would you have some tissues?
No, I don't need tissue.
Yeah.
The thing is, you just don't realize how you can talk about it at home and everything, but you forget how totally frightening.
It was a traumatic event.
And this would have been about
That's awful.
2 to 2.5 hours after the tornado hit. So, I mean, it took that much time to get things going at Central State, and to get in and to walk over all the things to get up there. So.
Yeah. I'll probably have you repeat starting right about there, just when we have a moment.
Okay.
And I might also, if it's all right, I'm a little curious. Once we get started, I'll kind of make this a little more formal here in a second.
Sure.
But I might back you up. You saw the tornado over Xenia, and do you remember what you were thinking at the time at all?
You're not recording that.
We'll edit this part out.
Well, yeah. You gonna say a bad word?
No, I would have said, oh shit.
That's what I was thinking you were gonna say.
And that's not that bad. But yeah, I mean, I'd never seen anything like it before. I mean, it was, clear what it was. What you can ask me a question about, what you asked her, what questions on what the day was like. I can tell you some stuff about what it felt like to me, not only temperature-wise, but the atmospheric pressure. It being really still, and it was just really strange.
You're gonna have people worse than us.
Before the tornado hit.
Really is.
And then snow the next, either overnight or the next
I
day.
can't even imagine how they're gonna talk.
All right.
When you are.
Okay.
Trying to think how to go about this. Okay, so we're gonna start back with getting back into town, how long it took. That's all I'm gonna go, and then we'll kind of go back to before. And that sound okay?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just make like I don't know if it will actually help Mark when he's editing or not, but at least this way. So you walked your way back into town. How long did that take?
So I don't know how long the walking took. What I can tell you is that the tornado hit at 4:40, as I recall. That would be in Xenia, maybe a couple of minutes later in Wilberforce. As I recall, from that time until I actually made it up to our house in Stadium Heights,
beforehand during the day that was unusual?
Well, first of all, temperature was unusual. By afternoon, the temperature was in the low 80s. I forget exactly what it got to, but it was like 82 or 83, 84, something like that. Not, you know, you can have some warm days in early April, but that's really, really getting warm. Especially just before the tornado hit, and this is one of the things that I noticed, by the way, when we went out to look at the tornado coming, you know, over Xenia as well, is that you could sort of feel that the atmospheric pressure was really low, and everything seemed so still. It's like you couldn't hear anything. It was just, everything was absolutely quiet.
Was there anything else that you remember thinking or feeling during that whole time in particular? Does anything stick out?
Not really, not that I can remember. You know.
When you had taken shelter, was there anything, what was going through your mind at that particular moment?
Well, I was okay when not that I knew what was going to happen or anything, but I think I didn't feel too bad when the freight train sound started up, and then when it calmed down. When that started up again, I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is it. It's, you know, I'm not going to make it, you know, out of this. But
Yeah.
that only lasted, you know, a few more seconds. And that was over.
Do you remember how the other people in the room with you reacted?
And we were just in a hallway, but yeah, I don't. One of the things that I just thought of, though, just because, one of the things is surviving the tornado, obviously, and I think we were really lucky. Those of us who were lying where we did, we were lucky because of where we were lying, because it ended up being a really, really good place to be. If that student had not kept me after class, I might have been at that time in my car on the way into Xenia. That could have been a different story. I know there actually was at least one person who was killed on 42 between Wilberforce and Xenia. And although this is sort of a later thing, while I'm thinking of it, I do remember the force of the wind while we were lying there as the tornado. I mean, you could really, really feel the wind howling through. And from that time, for about 2 weeks till about 2 weeks after, if I put my hands up on my head, I'd feel some little rough stuff. And so I would, shake it all out. And a few hours later, there was more of it in there. And so without realizing, I think the power of the wind actually embedded just really fine little particles into my scalp. And so they were surfacing, and I was getting them out. I remember that distinctly for about a couple of weeks after.
What do you remember of the experience in the days and weeks after the tornado?
So some of this is sort of the same things that Becky talked about. I remember the Red Cross and other organizations coming around, feeding us. I remember getting the tetanus shots, on the street in Stadium Heights. I remember that night that we went down, when it got dark, we went down into the basement and stayed the night down there. I don't think I slept this close, but sort of hearing it sort of going over the house. And this may or may not be accurate, and I'm sure the Weather Service may have more information about it, but it seemed to me like it might have been another funnel cloud, obviously not touching down, but going over. I remember the next day that it snowed, which says something about why we had a tornado, because we went from 84 degrees down to low 30s anyhow, or a little bit lower than that. I thought it was the next day, but it might have been 2 days after that Becky's folks came over and picked up the kids. I don't know if it was the night, whenever after Becky's folks picked up the kids. I remember from that point on we stayed with friends, Steve and Brenda Hauser, who lived in Amlin Heights, and we stayed with them for quite a while. I was thinking it was maybe for the rest of the time until electricity came back on, so that we could get back into our house and have heat and everything. And that was about 3 weeks before electricity was restored. Becky already told you that we had a sump, and so a sump pump in the basement, and so by at least the second day or so after, the basement was starting to flood, and we also didn't have a car. One of my former students, who became a good friend, he had been a student of mine the first year that I was at Central State. His name is Dave Derrick, and he lived with his folks on Brush Row Road. His dad had a farm, and Dave got a pump that his dad had, a gasoline-operated pump, and we set that up. And so one of the things that I had to do was, like, about every 4 or 5 hours, go back, if I wasn't at the house, go back to the house and start the pump. Once we got the water out of the basement, because the water, I think, got about that high in the basement or so. So we had to pump the water out first and then, keep it dry. And he also gave me one of his dad's cars to use. So I had some transportation until we were able to buy a car. I needed transportation because Central State started up again about 10 days after the tornado, so school was back on. We ended up buying a car. I remember it was a Ford Mustang. It wasn't necessarily the car that we wanted, but there was nothing available because everybody had lost their car, and so all the cars were gone from the lots. And the one thing that I remember is that there was no getting a discount price on a car. In fact, I think the prices were jacked up a little bit from what they were before the tornado. So at any rate, we ended up with a car, which we didn't care for that much, and it wasn't, it was a while after, but not long after, before we traded it in for something else.
So you said Central State started classes back about 10 days later.
Yeah.
Was that first day of classes the first time you were back on campus? Or did you go back in the midterm?
I don't remember. There probably wouldn't have been anything I could have done in the building because I'm sure it was closed at the time, so I suspect that I didn't go back until classes started up again. And when they did, because Banneker needed quite a bit of repair, one of the buildings that had minimal business college was located. And for the rest of that quarter, we taught the biology classes in that building. We didn't have labs, good lab access or anything, but we managed.
Do you remember anything about maybe the way the students acted after the tornado?
When I came back to school, not really. I just don't have a clear memory of that. Yeah, I think it was I think just everybody was just okay. It's not the best situation, but we're going to do the best with what we have, and we're going to start things up again, and we're going to continue to exist there.
What do you think have been the long-term effects of the tornado?
I already told you something about what I remembered Xenia being like before. I think Xenia really missed its chance after the tornado. I think there was lots of stuff that could have been done downtown, but instead the emphasis was put on building up the outside parts of the community, of adding to it on the outside, meaning building new structures instead of doing a nice job of redoing what had been there before. And I think that has not been good for Xenia, and I think that's seen in areas like the big shopping area where Walmart was originally, and there was a grocery, I think it was Kroger's in there, maybe. There was a food store in there, and now today most of those storefronts are empty. You hardly see a car in the huge parking lot area that's there. Downtown just doesn't have the pizzazz that it had before the tornado.
Are there any other details you want to share? Anything you remember in particular?
Not really. I mean, I guess what I would say would, there was a tremendous amount of help that came in from the outside. There was a tremendous amount of help just person to person from people who lived here. I think everybody, just in terms of getting through that initial stage, did a really good, if you can call it a job, did a really good job of making sure that everybody did okay.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience.